So tonight, what have we got in store? Basically, as always, here to answer any questions that you've got, wild and woolly as they may be, so far away at any stage. You can type some questions in the group chat, so feel free to do that, and I'll answer them as best I can. And also, yeah, I'll be talking about three things. First one is the best time or times along the investment journey to acquire your team. So we'll chat about that. How to buy in different states. So obviously going and buying interstate, not a drunken state. It's actually going and buying interstate. How do we go about that? How do we manage that process, etc. And then the third one, which I'll probably focus on a little bit more, is how to sell or when to sell your property and to consolidate. So, yeah, I want to elaborate on that a bit more. So, as I said, put some questions in the group chat, message me or anything that, anything else that you want to discuss, but also any questions you've got in relation to what we're talking about at the time, feel free to put some notes in there as well. So, yeah, hopefully the quality is good from a visual point of view, and you get something out of it tonight. So we'll roll for about probably 40 minutes or so, depending on how many questions, etc. we've got. As you probably realise, today the RBA dropped their cash rate by 0.25. No real surprise given the fact that coronavirus has put a dampener on the whole world. It was probably headed for a drop anyway, but that just obviously consolidated and made it a no-brainer. So the cash rate's at 0.5, which is extraordinary, one of the lowest of all time. Is that a good thing? Well, you'd argue that it is, because you can pay down debts in the quickest possible time frame because the holding costs are less, but definitely not good from the point of view of the economy. It's in reaction to the economy being so flat, so that's not a good thing in general for the country, or indeed the rest of the world. And the other part of it is too, if you're a retiree, you're probably not that happy because most likely you've got some cash wrapped up in some form of term deposit or trying to get some reasonable rates on a low risk situation from a bank or some sort of institution. So that's probably not giving you too much love at the moment. So they got whacked in the GFC, the retirees, and probably had to go out and work a bit more. Now they're copping it again. So best time or times along the investment journey to acquire your team. I always like to ensure that we're on the front foot and getting and employing our team sooner rather than later, and not being on the back foot in any way, shape or form. So let's first of all look at what is or who are your team of people. So there's a document that you all received when you first started with Solvair that is 100 questions to ask your professionals. So the first part of that is, well, who are my professionals? So understanding that you need those team of people around you. Some of them you need all the time. Some of them they're only here for a short moment and you can move on. But I'll start with the accountant. Now I get a common question from people saying, when should I engage my accountant, or when should I start looking for an accountant because I've never had one? The answer is, if I'm wanting to buy an investment property in the next 6 months, I would start to engage them now, or indeed recruit one, so that again you can hit the ground running with them, because ultimately you need to chat with them about your entity, your buying entity that you're in. If you've got existing portfolio, again, also a good chance to give them some preparation time before June 30. So really early on with the accountant, and don't be afraid to sack your accountant. I sacked mine about 10 years ago and haven't looked back since. It was a hard decision because they were reasonably close in my life, but it wasn't a personal thing against them. It was just simply that I had found an accountant that could do a much better job for my situation in my life, and that's the way it is. It's a little bit like trying to be loyal to the bank. If there's a better loan out there, then you've just got to look at in the best interests of your portfolio. Solicitor or conveyancer, so you may engage a solicitor for anything ranging from legal matters through to conveyancing when you're buying a property or selling a property. You want to get them in on the case nice and early when you're in the property search. So if you've started looking already, I would definitely engage a conveyancer in the state, usually in the state that you're buying. They need to be registered. Some are registered interstate, but it's unusual, so you're probably better off to get someone in that state that you're buying in. So engage them early on in the buying process is my recommendation. Always get a fixed price on their costings as well, because their time can definitely add up. A mortgage broker. Mortgage broker is something that, again, very early on in the process is recommended. If you're busily saving away with 30, 40, 50 grand and you're still maybe 6 months away in your own mind, it doesn't hurt to go and get yourself a borrowing capacity as to what it would look not like now, but also hypothetically, if I have got 60 or 70 grand, what would that do for me from a borrowing perspective? So doing a bit of forecasting with the broker. Yes, it's a bit of time out of their day to do that when it's a hypothetical, but they'd like to think that they probably win your business eventually if they're giving you some love. So nice and early on in the process. And then once you're ready to pull the trigger with your borrowing capacity, get yourself a pre-approval, plus for 3 months, sometimes 6 months, and then away you go. And you've got those relationships there, hopefully for the next 10, 20, 30 years, depending on how old your professionals are. But you want those teams to carry you through all situations. When you're actually finding a property, you've got real estate agents and property managers commonly. Now, if you're engaging a buyer's agent, then that's a different conversation. You need to know your strategy first to then know that your strategy is clear, that your buyer's agent can go and do their job. If you don't know your strategy, then you're open to the mercy of what the buyer's agent thinks, which may not suit your situation. If you're engaging real estate agents to try and source property for you, which is cool, engage as many as you can and be their best friend and be in their back pocket. Don't think of them as enemies, although you might think that they are in it for their own good for buying or selling a property, and that's cool. But you need to be their best friend, and they need to be thinking that you're at the top of the list when something's potentially being listed in the area that you're looking. So definitely engage them and be their friend and be that squeaky wheel that annoys them almost, because it is only some short-term pain. The property manager, again, in the 100 questions for professionals, have some really good questions in there to ask a property manager to recruit them. So go through those questions when you're trying to analyse who you're going to choose. Doesn't necessarily always have to be the selling agent. So that's a critical one. It's very easy to choose the selling agent as the property manager if they offer that service, but it doesn't mean they're going to be the best. Maybe logistically it's easy when they can simply hand the keys over to the office next door because they're in the same building, but it may not mean that they're the best property manager. And I've experienced that locally here where I bought a property and didn't go through them because I just didn't get a good property management team. And that can always change from time to time, as well as the property manager leaves, or indeed there's some change of staff throughout the time that you're with them. So don't become complacent in that respect. So that's really the main people that you need in your corner throughout your investment journey. Definitely your mortgage broker and accountant are your top two that I would focus on getting the best service available. People ask me about pricing wise. Look, you pay for good quality in anything in life, I believe. Yes, you can pay too much and some things are overpriced. But again, ask the right questions, get a good feel for it, make sure you can relate to them, and you're halfway there. If it's cheap, you usually get that standard result as a result of it being cheap, because they just can't do the service, because they need to employ more people to find more clients for them so that they can make a living. So yeah, it's a middle ground there from a price point of view. Yeah, flick through any questions you've got with any of that. If you're holding a portfolio, I would just encourage to check in every 6 to 12 months with all of them. So that includes mortgage broker for loans. It also includes property manager. They obviously should be contacting you with inspections and everything else, but I would encourage you to jump on the front foot and give them a call and have a chat to them. They're in their corner batting for you, hopefully. But yeah, engaging them and understanding who they are and knowing them first name basis is also critical when they go into bat with you or with the tenant. One thing I do ask of people to do is make sure you get your property manager to video their inspections. So get them to use their iPhone. It's pretty basic stuff nowadays to go and video 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Doesn't have to be long videos, just a couple of 30-second videos should cover the house pretty much and give you a feel, especially when you're interstate. You can't always get down there. You just it's a great way to feel as though you're in the room when they're videoing it. So keep that pretty basic, but I think it's an important one. Do mortgage brokers review your loans on a regular basis, or you need to approach them, is a question. So yeah, great question. And like anything, I think you definitely need to jump on the front foot. The really good brokers will get on the front foot, but not always, because the good brokers applying their trade, everyone wants a piece of them, so they're usually at the front end writing new loans. The Royal Commission, hopefully there's no mortgage brokers listening here, but I was hoping that it was actually going to change the commission structure and take away the ongoing commissions and just make a upfront commission base, so that it actually make the mortgage broker continue to re-engage you to keep you as a customer. But yeah, that hasn't happened. But yeah, I would jump on the front foot there and get them to review it, just a 6-monthly email or something like that. They may come out with a monthly newsletter or video expressing the thoughts, so you get a general feel, and when you're working sort of in my system, you'll get a feel for what interest rates are doing anyway. But a change of circumstance will also demand jumping on the front foot and chatting to the broker. Yeah, not so much the broker, but I contacted a bank in which I had a loan with last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry. The interest rate was a little bit high. I asked them, can they do a rate reduction? They asked me what I was getting elsewhere or what I've been offered elsewhere, which I pulled some figure out of somewhere. And 2 days later, I got a 0.7% reduction on my loan just for asking. So if I hadn't have jumped on the front foot, I definitely wouldn't have been offered that discount, that's for sure. So yeah, mortgage broker, definitely check in yearly from an interest rate perspective, and don't let 5 years go by and just out of sight, out of mind, because the bank won't automatically deduct it, and mortgage broker may not contact you to assess it.
What's the topic specifically?
Interesting. Yeah, so yeah, good question again about going through brokers, or would you ring the bank yourself, ask for a better rate? Either. It was actually when I printed off my next statement and I saw the rate, I thought, yeah, I'm going to have a go at this, and just rang the number on the statement. So yeah, up to you, but the mortgage broker in some cases may be able to negotiate a better loan depending on the relationship that they've had over time. So yeah, worth doing a bit of both. Okay, so next topic is how to buy in a different state. Finding, I suppose, number one, the property, number two, the property manager, and then doing an inspection. So I think it sort of ties in from the first part of finding a team of people for you to have for the next 10 or 20 years. In the one-off transactions that are interstate, and in a market that we're in, especially for a lot of Sydney clients that may be priced out of Sydney and looking elsewhere, or if you're in regional areas, you may not be continuing to buy in those regions. We are going interstate in a lot of cases. So Queensland, Victoria are common ones at the minute that we may be buying in, which means we're buying, in a lot of cases, sight unseen, which means we haven't jumped on a plane to go and visit that area. We've just done some research, Google Earth, agents on the ground, put in offers and transacted. Now, when people ask me, do we need to go and see it in the flesh, I say it's really a gut feel. 50% of the time I've bought property without seeing it. I've been comfortable in the research. Given that technology is pretty outstanding today, you can almost get a feel that you're right there and there. So I don't have a problem buying sight unseen, but it depends on how your sleep at night factor is and whether you can do that. But definitely, again, getting back to the team is having agents in your pocket in those areas that you're looking at buying, and making sure that you're the first person they ring when there's something jumps on or is potentially going to be listed. If you know your strategy, which you should, you know what price you should be paying for something, then you can act pretty quickly and catch the opposition off guard if you're nice to these real estate agents. So Google Earth, I recommend, is a solid one, which you're probably all familiar with.
I think you're in there.
And then your data searches like SQM research for vacancy rates. Realestate.com has your trends in terms of your last 10 years of capital growth in that particular suburb. RP data, obviously an expensive way to go about it, but it's a very effective from a comparable sales point of view. So look at those reports, and then generally just looking at, well, what are my vacancy rates like? What's my supply and demand in that area? How do I find out the population growth? So the Australian Bureau of Statistics has their census data every 6 years, but it also brings out different statistics by state pretty often. So you can jump on the Australian Bureau of Statistics website and have a look at that, and for a specific region or definitely a state. So once you've got the property, very quickly engaging a property manager, and again, same process, do your due diligence, 100 questions for your professionals, document, follow that through, choose your manager. It doesn't have to be the agent who sold it to you. And then inspections need to be regular. Every state's got a different, I suppose, standard in that respect. You may be able to get 4 inspections a year in some states, whereas other states will only allow 3. So I know in Victoria it's 3 maximum inspections a year. So you can't ask the property manager to go and do 4 for you because it's just not legal according to the tenant's rights and responsibilities. So again, going back to the videoing of it, just making sure that you are getting some video footage of your property. Can't be there. Gone are the days where you can actually claim the travel to your property.
No.
I think too many people back in the 80s and 90s were buying property on the Gold Coast and claiming their holidays as a tax deduction because they were visiting their unit or apartment up there. So finally the ATO changed the ruling on that about 18 months ago, I think 2 years ago. So you can no longer claim to go and visit your property regardless of what stage, whether you haven't bought it yet or when you own it, you still can't do that. legal anyway. So, but as I said, sight unseen is not as scary as it used to be because the stats and the data and the research are right in front of us without leaving our office. And also with the likes of Google Earth, you can be there on the ground or at least feel as though you are, that's for sure. How to buy in a different state. Just send through any questions that you've got in respect to that. I think most of clients that I deal with, you guys have a tremendous risk profile, and what that does, it allows you to look at things outside of the box that maybe the average person doesn't, and that's what sets property investors apart, or at least good property investors apart, is that you're prepared to look at all opportunities. Yes, the ones that are too good to be true usually are, that's for sure, but a lot of people in society wouldn't have the risk profile to go and buy outside of the region they're living in. But a lot of people that I meet and come across as clients couldn't care less where they buy as long as the research stacks up, and that's very much my motto as well, is if the research and the numbers work, then it works for me regardless of where it is in the country. It just so happens that most suburbs or towns in the country don't stack up, so we don't need to go there anyway. Definitely overseas is not an option for me, but again, some clients like to dabble in some of that as well. Same thing, know your research, do it well, and know what your worst case scenarios are.
Oh, you tried it? You've dropped it through?
It's really weird just looking at a screen and talking to it.
You want to feed it?
No one talking back. It's okay, so when and why to sell or to consolidate your portfolio. So some of you here have a combination of properties, others have yet to buy property, and there's some that are first home buyers that are basically in the market for the first time and looking at potentially what the next step is. That's basically the cross section we have. So I think regardless of where we are, we always should be looking further into the distance and then working our way back again. And what I mean by that is, I'm 42 at the moment, right, nearly 43. So I have an indication of what it might look like for me from a financial perspective when I'm 55 or 60, okay? You want to be 10 to 15 years ahead of yourself, I believe.
Okay.
You want to start thinking about how it's going to play out for you and why you're actually doing what you're doing. So the first part of it is always, when you're buying your next property, always have the one after that in mind. So if you're buying a property now, let's say it's okay, 500,000, I might need 75 grand to get into that transaction. What funds have I got available? Is it cash or equity? And then conversely, when is my next play going to occur? So if I want it to be in 2 years' time or 12 months' time, how do I get my next lot of 75K? Is it coming in equity? Is it coming in cash? Is it a combination of both? Is it a joint venture? All these things need to be worked out before you actually buy the existing property that you're about to buy. Right? Hopefully that makes sense to you. But then the long game is maybe it's a number of properties, maybe it's the amount of wealth, maybe it's the amount of cash flow, maybe it's the lifestyle choices that you desire. It's going to be different for everyone. So knowing what that 10, 15, 20 years might want to look like for you gives you a starting point to say, well, how does the next 5 years play out? I think not enough people, investors, look at the long game and they start worrying about the long game only when they get to it, i.e. when I turn 55 and I'm 5 years from retirement. The steps that we made on the lead up to that absolutely impact the result that it's going to give you at 55 or 60. So thinking about it now is critical. How that leads into why and when you would want to sell is you don't ever want to be forced to go and sell a property, right? Now, the most common form of property sales is due to someone
distress,
being either forced to sell or wanting to get out because their lifestyle situation is not working for them, right? Now, they are the reasons that you don't want to be selling, because it's an opportunity for people like you and me to go and buy, but you usually take a haircut on that, which means you buy, you sell with emotion, thinking, okay, well, I wanted $450 for it, but they're offering me $420 with a short settlement. Okay, I'm just going to get it done and rid myself of this thing that's been giving me grief. Well, why did it give us grief in the first place? Is usually because we didn't know our numbers to begin with and look at our worst case scenarios. So the whole premise of what I'm talking about here is you want to sell when you want to sell, not when you have to sell.
100%.
Right? So I would say there are 3 reasons as to why you would sell. Number 1, if you want to pay down a large portion of your mortgage for an increased lifestyle. For example, you might have a principal place of residence mortgage of $400,000. You've got an investment property sitting over there that you've had for some time. It's already done its thing from a growth cycle, at least in one cycle phase, and you might have, I don't know, $200,000 or $300,000 of equity there, or profit if you sold that property. Okay, you can go and sell that property with the view to basically wipe out most of your mortgage, which then frees up your lifestyle cash to either A, go and invest more, or B, increase your lifestyle. And that might be retiring earlier, it might be putting the kids through university, or traveling more, or going back to part-time in your life. So that's one reason as to why you may want to sell a property. However, there's a disclaimer to that part of it, and it is, make sure you're aware of what the property cycle's doing before you go and sell, right? If you're not aware that the property cycle is presenting some great opportunity for growth, and then it doubles in the next 5 years after you sold it, you'd be kicking yourself, right? So do your homework before you make that decision to pay down your mortgage, or indeed your bad debt. Okay. The second time as to why you would sell would be if you've bought in a speculative market, right? Now, I'm never a fan of buying in one-horse industry towns like mining or just purely agriculture, or something that's just driven by one major part of the economy. And if that falls over, then the whole town dissipates and the vacancy rates rise and the property prices dramatically take a hit. So what I mean by speculative market is something that you've looked at buying into that presents some good short-term growth, but it's not a capital city. It's not a capital city where you might hold it for the next 30 years. It's a market that's got a bit of both. It's a diverse economy. It's a reasonable population that's always growing. But you thought, you know what, I've made some good money from this property already. I'm going to sell out of that market and maybe park my money into more of a blue chip investment into a major capital city, or maybe to even go and buy your own home for the first time. So that's the second reason as to why you might do that. But again, understanding that if you've bought something and you've been in a speculative market and it hasn't worked in the first 3 years of owning it, please don't go and sell it when it hasn't done its job for you, right? Over the long term, it will work itself out, but need to give it time. So I'm referring there to markets where you've already made your money, but it's a little bit more speculative than it is in a capital city. So 8 years in, 7 years in, when it's already done its thing, you might get out and park your money somewhere else into more of maybe a low risk investment, or indeed in your time in your life, if you're still young, it might actually be a higher risk investment, such as a mini development or a duplex, something like that. And then the third time that you might look to sell is when you're looking in closer to retirement. Right now, I like to use the word retirement, but maybe let's call it a lifestyle transition. So we're approaching that period, or we think we are from an energy age point of view. We maybe think we've got 5 years left or 3 years left, or we're going back to part-time, and we've had a chat with our accountant. We may then decide to maybe sell down on some of our portfolio. So we might have 5 or 6 properties. We maybe sell down on 1 or 2 of those, reduce the debt on majority of the other properties, which gives us a really good positive cash flow portfolio when we're not earning big income, when we're trading time for money. So that's another reason as to why you might sell down, just to ensure that your retirement is reasonably low risk and high cash flow from the properties that you're still holding. Now, if you had 5 properties, would you sell down on all 5 and live happily ever after? No. Personally, I wouldn't. I'd probably do a combination of both. But again, depends on the yield of the whole portfolio. If you had 5 properties and it was giving you an extra 20 grand a year in positive cash flow, plus you're working part-time and earning yourself 40 or 50 grand, and you wanted to live off 50, 60 grand, then you don't need to sell any, do you? So it's working out what it looks like for you at the time. The key thing that overrides all these 3 reasons to sell is that the properties have already done their thing, right? They've already made you some money, and you're getting out of that and into something that's going to be either more conservative because you're closer to pulling the pin on work, or something that's going to give you what you believe to be a better opportunity over the longer term. Now, in the unfortunate situation where you buy a property, I've had it 10 years and it hasn't done its thing, it hasn't given me much growth, if at all. Now, that's a crossroad conversation that you need to have with yourself. Do I hold it for another 10 in the hope that property goes up over time, which most cases the answer to that would be absolutely yes. It's a case-by-case basis. I did a clarity call with someone the other day who bought a property. It was actually a unit in Melbourne, and they bought it 10 years ago, and it was actually worth about 10 grand or 20 grand less than what they'd paid for it 10 years ago. So in that example, property doesn't always go up. Right now, granted, in 20 years' time or even 5 years' time, we might be having a conversation where it's gone up 100 grand or 200 grand, who knows. But at the time of speaking, it had gone backwards over that 10-year period.
Stressful.
So the first thing I asked this person was, what is it costing you to hold? Now, the first response was, I wouldn't have a clue. Now, that's an error in itself. We need to know the facts and the numbers of what the property is costing us to hold, so that we can make an informed decision around it and not be wrapped up in emotion, which this person definitely was. Right?
By that, I just like
emotion take control because all they could see was money coming out of the bank each month. Right? So when we actually did an analysis of it, the property wasn't costing them anything to hold after tax. It was actually giving them a positive outcome. So worst case is that in 10 years, the property hadn't made them money, but it also hadn't lost them any money, right? So there's definitely much more worst case scenarios than that out there. Now, is it ideal that it hasn't made anything in 10 years? Absolutely not. But the transaction costs of selling property and being forced to sell is an expensive one, especially if you're emotionally wrapped up in that sale. So, yeah, rule number one, it's got to be in your control that you sell the property and not be forced to sell because of something in your lifestyle that's impacted you or emotions have taken control through lack of performance or the hot water system blew up or there's rental vacancy or things like that. That all should be forecasted for in our annual property analysis over our
work.
portfolio. Hope that's making sense to you.
Yeah.
There is an exception where you don't hold it for the long term and take your profits and run. And that is, and I mentioned it briefly before, that is a mini development. So you might say, right, I'm putting 200K into a development. I'm putting it in an entity which is going to give me a profit so I can distribute the profits and get out of that in a 2 or 3 year time frame. That is a specific strategy that is very different from your long-term buy and hold strategy, right? So wanting to sell in that 2 to 3 year period is definitely a strategy based on the numbers that you've done before you bought this development and did a feasibility study on the cost to build and the holding costs and the cost of the land and the council applications and the curb and guttering and all those things, the sale price, the real estate agent's fees, and then the net profit after capital gains. So you've done that analysis, you know you're in it for a 2 3 year period, and then you get yourself out of that and move on to something else with it. So that's the only exception there where we wouldn't be holding it for the long term, in my view, right? Now, I do meet the occasional speculator that wants to continue to buy, renovate and sell.
Your mum goes, what
That's not for me personally.
No, you want to ask?
As I said before, the transaction costs of property are far too great. The capital gains tax implications of holding it for a short term, i.e. less than 12 months, is also hard felt on investors, and they've cracked down even harder on that. And the more you continue to do it, if you're doing it often, they'll actually refer to you as a business owner in property development, which means there's GST and all sorts of other implications on that as well. So I know I put my hand up. I early days thought I'm going to be a property mogul through buying and flipping properties, and went to seminars around it and got all clued up on it and understood it and thought, this is great, this is my next 30 years. But understanding once you actually look at the dollars and the other options out there in terms of long-term wealth, it was really not a lot different to trading your time for money, I thought anyway. So, but yeah, that's a time where you would get in, get out with your development, make sure you're getting your minimum 20% profit on that outcome over that period of time. So there we have it. Is there any other questions or comments in relation to any of those three, or anything else that doesn't even relate to what we've spoken about tonight that anyone wants to fire away at me while I'm sitting in the office at 10 to 8 on a Tuesday?
The bitter.
I should say. Yeah.
Just while anyone's thinking of any questions, just a reminder to...
I don't know what the question is.
Keep in touch, drive the level of support that you need. Solbeck Connect on Facebook is a good place for some different stuff. Solbeck YouTube with all of our videos on it that we ever do. So right back to probably 4 years ago or 5 years ago when I looked a bit younger, there's videos on most topics within property. Obviously our podcast that if you're a millennial or if you're even older, you're still allowed to listen. So I've got M3 property as well as My Millennial Money podcast, so a couple there. And the monthly webinars, which
there
right now, and just a general phone or email contact as well. So drive that level of support that you think you need.
His face.
Okay, question. Cam talked about getting into the market with a small deposit is better and waiting and saving because property can increase quicker. After getting in the market with your first property, is the second property different? Once you're in the market, is it better to save for slightly larger deposit and wait for a bit longer, pulling the trigger increase quicker than your savings? Yes, very good question. And 100 people get asked that question, you'd have 100 different responses, Cam, I'm sure. I liken it to a tennis ball. I've got a tennis ball in my hand, and the end of the field is 100 metres away. I can throw that ball quicker than I can run with that ball to get to the end, right? The ball will travel way quicker through the air than it will be at land speed. Maybe Usain Bolt, slightly different. But in general, the analogy is there. I can continue to save consistently over the next 12 months, 2 years, and I know how much I'll definitely have, right? However, once property is leveraged at an amount, the growth that it can potentially bring in is going to far exceed your amount that you can save at, okay? So I take the example of a 500K property, it goes up 10%, there's 50 grand. Now, when can it go up by 10%? Well, 12 months, right? Can you save 50 grand in 12 months?
No.
Maybe some can, but not a lot can, right? Can it go up 20% in 1 year? Yes, it can. So it has the potential to go up 100 grand in 1 year. Can you save that amount? Absolutely not, right? Or very rare.
No.
So I like to get into the market sooner rather than later. The next best time to buy is tomorrow, and the second best is the day after that. Purely because you're in it to win it. You're in there with a chance. If you're not in the game and the market grows, then yes, you do get left behind, as you mentioned, Kat. Now, you're referring to that next play. So
if you have equity, should you pull
every day of the week, this has always been my thinking.
Or do you
If I've got enough to get me into the market that I want to be in for the least amount of money, I will always do that, as opposed to trying to save to avoid lender's mortgage insurance, for example. Okay, so again, I'll use the example of a 500K property. I can get in, well, in some cases I can get in with 95% lend. So 5% deposit, and then another maybe, let's call it, I can get in for 40 grand, right? 40 grand on a 500K property. Now, I understand what my yields and my holding costs are and all those sort of things. I get whacked with LMI, but I believe I can get into that market at the right time, as opposed to spending another 18 months trying to save another 30 grand, okay? I would do that every day of the week, as opposed to waiting 18 months and saving, okay? So that's not for everyone, because the risk profile varies from person to person. I get that. It's just always been my strategy of lending as much from the banks as I can, but ensuring that you understand your yields and understand your holding costs in your worst case, vacancy rates going up, interest rates going up, being in control of your income, those sort of things. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Understanding the location that you're buying in, rather than the price it is. Now, for the last 10 years, I knew that, known that 400 to 500K was an amount that was enough to get into the most markets that I wanted to, right? Maybe a little bit higher for some of the capital cities, but in general, that was enough to get in, right? So prior to that, it was probably around the 300, 350. Now, it was all relative because of income rises and things like that, but I think sitting here saying, well, I can lend, I can purchase something to maximum 300K, then you probably still need to sit on the fence and save a bit more money. But if you're sitting here saying, well, I can get in at 500, but I'd love to save more money so I can buy in at 700, my answer would be, majority of the time, get yourself in at 500 and give yourself a chance at getting some growth in the shorter term. If it doesn't come off, well, at least you've been in there. Much better than what happened in Sydney 2014 to 16, where people missed the boat because they were trying to save an extra 10% to avoid LMI when they could have made themselves 200,000 or 300,000.
Yeah.
They'll never get that opportunity again, or very unlikely to get that opportunity again. So, yeah, I hope that makes sense. All right, cool. Nothing else,
No,
I don't
thank
believe. So, yeah,
Thank you.
continue to sing out with different topics. Catherine, our marketing guru, will send out some briefs on what you would like the webinar to be on going forward. So the next one will be Tuesday, the 7th of April, 7 o'clock. I'll hopefully be here at 7 o'clock this time and not have a Zoom
Webinar's available.
function like I did tonight. So again, massive
Available, like,
apologies to that.
Recorded.
But yeah, so in the meantime, take care out there and look forward to chatting soon. Bye, guys.